Hey everyone, welcome to Beyond. Thanks for joining, and be sure to hit like and subscribe so the algorithm can find the channel. Today we're welcoming Berkey Brown. Berkey, welcome.
Hey Ben, how you doing, man?
Good. I'm really fired up on this continued part in roadmaps resilience, and I think last week we had a really good conversation related to psychopaths and bullies in the workplace. I know that's a very taboo topic because if you were to like that topic we had last week, it suggests that you agree with it. So I think people are very careful about
Right.
their recognition of the topic and how they deal with it, because it can be the difference between having a job, keeping your job, or being fired. So this week I want to talk a little bit about managing psychopaths in the workplace, and if you come across it, what are some constructive things you can do to manage and deal with it. But as we think about it, when we think about psychopaths in the workplace, you are required to do things that, I'm sorry, if you encounter it, how do you know if you're experiencing a pathological workspace or work environment? Well, if you're required to do things that make you feel weak or ashamed, I'd argue, your answer is stop and don't do that. Now, sometimes people would say that maybe that's not so simple,
Right.
but I was reading from Solzhenitsyn. He says systems go terribly out of control when people don't stop them when they're going mildly out of control. So sometimes you see something in the workspace and you really don't speak up about it. And what happens is it festers and grows bigger and bigger, affects more people. And at some point, there's a day of reckoning, right? People have had enough, or there's a big event that's happening within the work environment.
So real, man. Nip it in the bud, right? That's the terminology that I use. That's the phrase that I use as often as possible. And what it means is you cut it before it grows, right? There's no such thing as non-action, because even the idea of non-action is a choice to not act. That's an action in itself. And so a lot of times the way that these people kind of take more and more territory is when they don't come up against competition, right? When they don't come up against something that's pushing back. So in these type of situations, one of the most important things is immediately knowing that when someone shows this behavior or this character that is outside or out of character compared to the culture that's trying to be created, then it needs to be immediately, whether publicly or privately, maybe first privately, then publicly, just stopped. Because once that is set, a boundary line is set. But one of the most difficult things to do is literally to be able to, once a boundary line is crossed, try to get somebody to go back into that boundary. It's very, very difficult. It's just like trying to ask a kid, after you've allowed them to do something for a certain amount of time, you're allowed to go to bed, okay, 10 o'clock. They're like, you know what, it's going to be 9 o'clock now. Oh, they're going to give you hell. They're going to give you hell because they've already gotten used to that new space. So one of the most important things is speaking up immediately, right in those moments. Those moments will send a message to everybody else. And I've done that before, where I've had to call someone out specifically in the moment. They were talking out of turn. And I'm like, you need to allow this person to listen because they listen to you. That's how we do it here. I always bring it back to that's how we do it here. And that's why it leads to the most important thing, which is if you don't have a culture that is expressed how you show up and don't show up, it makes it very difficult. At very best, the only thing you can do as an employee is at least teach that person how not to deal with you. But if you're in a good company with a good culture, then you can say, hey, this is not how you deal with me or anybody else within this space. So nipping it in the bud is the most important thing, man.
No, that's right. And I think, when you think about these dynamics and you have a bully or a psychopath that you're working for, or maybe several rungs up from you, it's a really delicate issue to deal with, right? Because again, there's the politics, there's the overreaction, there's the perception. Maybe you're just being too sensitive, et cetera, et cetera. And one might say that maybe I should just keep my head down, right? And shut up, because that wouldn't be, bad advice if you're talking to yourself, right? Because you don't want to necessarily create trouble, or you don't want to create trouble that maybe doesn't exist, perhaps, right? And you certainly don't want to create trouble you certainly don't need within the context of an organization. But I think you have to ask yourself daily, what makes you think that if you don't respond to it, that you're not selling your soul daily? You have your ethos, you have what's right and wrong in your mind's eye. You have how you've always been treated. And I would say for most people, it's pretty reasonable. But when you come into those situations, you just put your head down saying, I don't want to rock the boat.
Right.
A fundamental question you have to ask yourself is, am I selling my soul every day? Because when you do that, it's soul depleting, it's energy depleting, and it's certainly motivation depleting.
Absolutely, man. You have to, this is why my work spends so much time figuring out what you value, what you stand for, what you won't stand for. Because once you know that, it becomes very easy to move through the world. Very easy to choose a job, very easy to choose a mate. because you can say, do they align or do they not align? I was just talking with a client of mine who really didn't know how to choose what job or what mate she wanted. And as time has gone by through the program, she can just talk to the person and already understand where the alignment is in comparison to her vision of what she's trying to create. Same thing with the job that she works at. She's like, okay, I know there's a ceiling here. And since I know there's a ceiling here, I'll grow to this point, and then I know that I need to move this place. When you know what your values are, when you know who you are, it becomes very, very, very easy to know what to do next or know what not to do now. Right? That's a very powerful place to be. But for people that aren't aware of that, they end up kind of having these small concessions where they're just saying, let me just put my head in the sand, wait for this to run out. And I've talked to people recently that were in that space where they're like, okay, we'll wait for these people to get old and retire, then we can create the new space. But the question is that if you're in that mindset of sticking your head in the sand, right? You're also saying that the culture can't grow until this thing outside of me happens. And if you don't take it as incumbent upon you to make the changes internally, to stick to your values, to stick to your morals, then what's happening is you're going to send a message that that's the best thing to do when things get hard, when things get uncomfortable, when things get awkward, for you to just kind of be quiet. Now, this doesn't mean like start a revolution or a coup. What it does mean, though, is to start to build relationships. When you build relationships with other people that are not this psychopath or this bully boss or this bully coworker, when you build other relationships and pour positivity in those relationships, and people start to be drawn to you and they start to vibe and reflect that positivity, what will soon happen is you will create this outnumbering effect where the positive people outnumber the negative person. And it'll make it such a stark difference between the culture that you've created because of your energy and this person's energy. And the cool thing is in that moment, that person will either have to convert or eject themselves, jettison themselves from the space, because the goal is to outnumber it. And the only way that you can outnumber it is by not turning yourself off, but by turning yourself on and drawing others to that energy. People are more drawn to positive energy when they experience it consistently. When they're around somebody who's a complainer, who's micromanaging, who's not allowing any type of autonomy, they're going to be frustrated and they're going to avoid. But then you create this new energy, this new space. It'll get that person to either make the changes necessary or realize that this is not where they belong.
I think that's right. I think there's so much insanity going on up in the mid-level to upper level of management and bureaucracy, right? I think that's where all the tyranny seems to be happening, because these people are trying to jockey to get to the next level, the CEO suite perhaps, whatnot. And so I think the irony is that, or the reason it multiplies at this level is because sensible people don't say anything. And the reality is there's a lot more sensible people than unsensible people. But the unsensible people are the ones that create all the noise, right? They're the ones sort of directing the energy.
Right.
I think it's an opportunity for people to really step up. So what I want to do also is talk about some recipes for success. How do you deal with this environment? I think, the first thing I would argue that if you're dealing with a psychopathic workplace, a boss or bully, you really need to prepare to find another job. That doesn't mean you're going to another job, but you're prepared, right? Because if you can't tell someone to go to hell, you can't negotiate with them. If they have you over in a barrel, there's not a lot you can do. If you have something you could go to or that you're prepared for, you have a lot more leverage in your negotiation about behavior, about what you expect in that environment. And if they know you could walk away at some point, or you have that option, I would argue, businesses are terrified of losing their best and brightest. That human capital, that's what's the magic of the business. And so I would argue to somebody, if you're going through it, start the preparation to look for the next opportunity, something obviously much better, because it gives you a lot more leverage in the negotiations and trying to deal with these toxic environments.
Absolutely. And I would couple that with as you're looking for these other options and these other places that you can kind of jettison to, is to, at the same time, in the work that you're in, most people, what they do is as soon as they start to look for another job, they turn off at the job that they're at. So what happens is they don't understand it, but because they've disconnected from trying to engage in that workspace, because they've convinced themselves they can't do good work there, they're spending all their time looking for a job, but they're not engaging here. One of the things that's most important, especially in this kind of economic place that we're at, jobs may not be readily available. So as you're doing that work, you should be fully engaged in trying to create a better space in the work that you're at right now. Because if you become an asset, if you become a value add, when you finally find that job, you can leverage, right? But if you're not, there's no leverage if you are a bad employee. If you're a bad employee and you want to work somewhere else, I'd be like, by all means, go. Like I can replace you. You're just a number. You're just a body. You're just a person. That's the way that people can think. But if you show yourself to be a massive asset And that's what's so important. You do good work wherever you go until you're done. That's a character trait. It has nothing to do with just the environment. If I'm only a good worker or a bad worker based on my environment, then I have no character within myself. I'm only by some external motivator doing what's supposed to be done. So I say search hard for that other job that matches your values, but at the same time, build yourself up. So at that point, you can leverage one against the other. You can say, hey, I have another job that's moving in a space that I want to go, but I like where I'm here and I see the potential and I want to be a part of that potential, but I know that changes need to happen. So then you have that leverage, and that's really what it's about. So yes, look hard, but at the same time, work hard where you're at, because that puts you in a place of being able to make the choices or at least call some shots.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good life principle, right? You know, you have to have a backup plan. You got to be able to make that lateral move at times, and you don't want to
Yeah,
be caught flat-footed in a situation that just is soul-sucking, right? That just
right.
is so depleting. So I think another thing that one has to think about when they're dealing with a toxic work environment, you know, are the things that are disturbing your soul at work, right? Are the things
Mm-hmm.
going on at a soul level? You just know it. Maybe you can't articulate it.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, it could be that maybe the person that's feeling this pressure is seriously lazy, dishonest, and useless. I mean, it could be.
Right. Right.
But I think that person that's feeling this way at work, it probably is a good starting point to you know, go talk to family and friends, wife, husband, etc., to see if in fact there's something in your character, your personality that could be creating this dynamic. Because you know, we can say this guy's a bully or this girl's
Right.
a bully, is a boss, but maybe it has something to do with your character. But once you've kind of gone through and you talk to people you most trust, right, and you've limited your own, I would call it personal pathology as a source of your dissatisfaction,
Right.
then maybe there is something going, you know, rotten going on in Denmark in the company. But I think it's really
Right.
important to make sure you're able to identify that in fact it is what it is in your mind's eye, and you're able to sort of bounce it off people you trust.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things I always say is when you have bad relationships, you may be the common denominator. And it is one of the most important things. I think I might have mentioned this last week, is that even if it's 2% my fault, I say, okay, what can I do with that 2%? Sometimes people are frustrated people. They don't realize that it's 50-50, that it takes two to tango. They don't realize that it's 60-40. They don't know how much of themselves are involved in triggering this other person. And so it is important to do that kind of due diligence and introspective work to be like, okay, where am I possibly the issue? What could I do better? One of the things that I say is if every person on the planet, including your boss, your coworker that's driving you nuts, if every person was coded to be that way and they would never change, what can you do internally with yourself and your perspective to make yourself live a happier life? If you come at it with that perspective, then you're guaranteed success because you allow everything to be your responsibility. The problem is if you have someone that's driving you nuts and all you can do is complain, then they may be sourcing something for you that you need. Some people just need to complain. They need to have an enemy. They need to have a problem. They need to have something to talk about, right? So the question is, okay, great. You've gotten to the point where you aren't happy with this person. What are you going to do about it? If you haven't clarified any plan of action, then that means that you're just swimming in the shallow end of complaint. That does nothing. That grows nobody. That actually draws and brings people down. So yes, it's first most important to see kind of where the issues lie within you. And then from there, once you understand what is yours, you can work on it. Then you set a vision for what do I see for us, these two people, me and that person. What can I do to grow our relationship so that we can grow the company? And sometimes there's different strategies. And I'm happy to tell you some stories of things that I've done when I was younger that really kind of helped turn the bully into a close friend and actually allowed us to build a great relationship and also build the business in a huge way.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just recognizing it, right? And once you identify the pathology and it's not you, then you
Right.
have a decision to make within the company, right? Do I
Right.
go talk about it? And you know, maybe you should, because you know these things happen at companies faster than you can imagine. And I'm sure human resources are always trying to deal with some of these dynamics and the politics and the frayed edges and how it affects people and productivity. Because ultimately, I'd say that's what companies are trying to focus on: a happy
Right.
work environment, productive work environment. And I think that, you know, if you go and talk about it to your boss or to the person that's creating the energy, it certainly could be an adventure. But I'd also argue that if you're going to do that, be sure to, you know, choose your words very, very carefully. Be very,
Right.
very thoughtful in whatever, you know, thing you want to talk about in regard to the bullying and the tactics being used. Because, you know, what you say and how you say it goes a long way in helping people understand your position. If you go in there hot, and if you go in there with the wrong words, it certainly will fall on deaf ears, in my opinion. And what it could turn into is that as you take this step in trying to correct what's going on in this environment, maybe you're the canary in the coal mine, right?
Yeah.
You're not just some psychopathic mouthpiece, but maybe you're showing that, hey, to the powers that be on high, the CEOs and the board of directors, there's something ominous going on. We think about, what was it? Not Lyft, the other company. I'm blanking. The CEO of Uber, right?
Mm.
And
Oh,
you
yes.
understand the culture that he was creating, and ultimately
Yeah.
he got pushed aside. But it was part of the Me Too. But he was creating a dynamic and a culture that people didn't feel comfortable talking
Right.
to until it got to an inflection point to the
Right.
board level, and drivers were exhibiting certain behaviors and qualities and characteristics because it all filters down.
Yeah.
And so there's ways that things will come out in time, and eventually maybe it's a total shift of management at the highest levels because they're enforcing a culture that isn't helpful. But I think that when people go about saying, okay, it's not me, I've confirmed it, I've got my sanity, now I'm going to approach it. I think it's really important how you talk about it, what you talk about, how you position it, because you could really be benefiting a ton of people within the organization and beyond.
This is great. It's a great point, because what happens when you change your perspective, and this is something that I've had to do, when I'm working with clients who are moving from kind of employees to business owners, they take this personage, this taking things personal. And I'm like, when you move into owning your own business, when you're an entrepreneur, there is no personal. Like you don't make decisions based on what it feels like. This person didn't call me back. This didn't. And so I'm going to kind of I'm not going to respond back, or like all those games, like go out the window. When you break beyond the level of you, when you have done that introspective work and you've learned to make peace, if these people were codes and programs and they stayed the same and you found out how to make peace within yourself, all of a sudden you move up Maslow's scale to a certain extent. It's no longer my self-preservation, but it's also the preservation of my coworkers, right? And also the preservation of the business. It's when people go to war, they're not fighting for their country, they're fighting for the person that's standing right beside them. So all of a sudden, if I'm okay, but my coworkers aren't okay because this bully is causing a negative effect on them, then all of a sudden it's incumbent again on me. I have the impetus to be able to speak up for them. Now, let's say if I'm bought even more, let's say it's in a solid culture and I'm bought into the company and the impact that the company makes, then what I do is I see an impediment. This person and their energy is an impediment to what we're trying to build, because we're so clear on what the vision is. At that point, I will run through you because my vision is so strong. That's where it becomes powerful. That's where it's no longer about, I need to stand up and assert myself. That's level one, stand up and assert yourself. But once you love yourself, you're naturally going to stand up and assert yourself because you love yourself. Then you're going to start to do it for those that are around you. And then you're going to do it for the greater vision. And that's why the people who have clear visions are willing to put their lives on the line for them to be able to be successful. You look at all the greats who have died for some cause. They see something that nobody else can see, that people are wanting to see. They want to believe, and they believe in it so much that they're willing to go to that space. So level one, preserve yourself, understand how to make peace amongst the situation. Then be able to set your own boundaries. Then see your comrades as people that are important to you and fight for them, and then fight for the grand vision of the organization. That's when you're at a place where you're unstoppable. That's when you become a integral asset to a company. That's where people want to follow, and that's where they raise you up to the top. It really becomes like that. But you have to be able to go through that ladder step to get to that place.
Well said, Burke. And I think, we oftentimes are motivated through pain, right? It gets so painful that we're forced to make a move, maybe that we didn't want to make because we didn't have the confidence, but that pain ratio really is I think, an inflection point for a lot of people. And I think you have to ask yourself if the circumstances are making you weak,
right,
or strong, right? And that's because the weaker you get, the more you are tyrannized, I would argue. And the more bitter you'll get, the more you'll snap at your significant other, just the worse your emotional mental state becomes. Right. Because when you feel weak, when you feel helpless, bitter, I would argue, often ensues. So I think when you think about, do I approach this boss? Do I approach the power structure? You really have an ethical obligation, I would argue, to confront what I'd call creeping tyranny, no matter where it occurs. Because this is about, how do you get the confidence to go do that thing, go take on that political hot ball, if you will. Because again, people are worried about their jobs, they're worried about their mortgages, they're worried about a lot of things.
Right.
And do they have the confidence to really, attack what needs to be attacked? But again, I think in my mind, it comes back to, if it's making you feel weaker, and how's that impacting your personal relationships, or even the relationships at work, which you talk to, Burke? I mean, these are all big warning signs to really consider.
Yeah, it's a great question. I say the same thing. Actually, I ask that question. I ask people to ask that with their significant others. But the statement is that statement here to build me up or to tear me down? Like, are you trying to build me up or tear me down? Is this trying to build me up or tear me down? And just like you said, that stronger, weaker is such a really good clarifying question, because if I say, oh, this makes me feel weaker, then it gives me clarity that I need to do something about it, whether it's on their part or on my part, right? So that's something that's huge. Now, again, at the same time, you don't want to rock the ship so much that you fall out. You know what I mean? We want to make sure that you're working. And so at the same time, there has to be this shrewdness, this awareness, this dance that's being made to where you know what you can do and what you can't do. And sometimes you might have to start the game with kill them with kindness. Like, that may just be the first thing. And then from there, if that doesn't work, then you can kind of move up to the other space. Try to understand the motivations of the person. Speak to them in their language. You know what I mean? Reflect back to them. Talk to them. And maybe you can, to an extent, win them over. But if they're, let's say, a narcissist, that's not happening, right? You'll feel like you have this breakthrough conversation and then nothing changes. Okay. When you realize that, you have to change your strategy. Now, I've had it where I had a coworker who was just driving me nuts. Every time that I would do anything wrong or anything that wasn't perfect, he would shine the spotlight on it, let everybody know. He was making more sales. He's like, oh, here I am. Where's Burkay? And then boom, I'm down at the bottom. This is when I was 18 years old. And I was reading a book, How to Have Power and Confidence in Dealing with People. And one of the first things that it said to kill them with kindness, always be listening. People fall in love with people who are good listeners, and always walk around with your head tall. So I ended up doing all those things. And one of the things I remember was a moment when I was starting to do better in sales with him than he was. And I didn't make a comment. All I did was great. I said, great job. I put a kind light on him. Every time there was an opportunity for me to get him back, I didn't do what he did. That created this space where he felt more comfortable. I started asking questions about his life. He started to feel like I was a confidant. And then at the same time, if he ever tried to bring something on me, I would laugh it off. I didn't care. I would walk tall. I'd walk to the places that I wanted to go, and I never even would pay him mind. Coupling those together, he became my friend, right? Coupling those together, it all of a sudden shifted the dynamic. That's like a level 1 attempt. If that doesn't work, then you have to try a new strategy. And those strategies are a little more aggressive. That's when you do talk to HR. That's when you do kind of get an idea of what other people are feeling about the person. That's when you do try to tie the values of the company to the dissonance that is him or her. And that's when you kind of move into those kind of escalated areas. So it's always about the process, always about trying everything you can to do it amicably. And then if not, then maybe you should wage war.
Yeah, I think it's about picking your poison, right? You can have tyranny or famine, but those are your choices sometimes, right? And I think if you're feeling oppressed at work, right, by what you have to swallow at work,
right,
you're not paying a price for that. You're paying a huge price for that. So I think there's reasons to really step up, because I would argue when one has no self-respect, or worse, you're an agent of your own self-destruction, because you're not doing anything about it. You're just lamenting the fact you're wallowing in the obvious that things aren't right. And the inaction is worse than action, I would argue. Ultimately, what it's going to do to you, it's certainly not going to help your career. If you're there, you're not motivated, you're not part of the game plan, you're not pulling your weight. And we've seen this happen over and over again in big organizations. And this all comes back to management and engagement and all that. But I really think people are destroying their own ideal. And you're letting, I would say, corrupt people win. I mean, at some point you got to say, this is who I stand for. This is what I am. And I'm willing to do that. Take that risk, if you will. I'm willing to do that, because really for myself to my loved ones, number one, but certainly for the team, number two. And it could be that when you take that step and confront, you may not be at that job. And it goes back to what we said earlier. Make sure you have a backup plan, and make sure you're preparing yourself for the next opportunity.
So real, man. I think it's, the effect, and I've had a client's wife of mine who despised their job so much that they were throwing up just getting ready to go to work, like feeling nauseous, feeling sick, because it was such a toxic environment. At those moments, just like you said, tyranny or famine, you really have to count the cost. Like, are you willing to put yourself in a position to where you're willing to get paid less at an environment that's more healthy for you, right? Maybe you need to downsize your lifestyle, because your health is one of the most important things. If you're getting paid a great amount of money, but you're getting sick and you're being miserable, how is it going to be in your family dynamic? How are you going to show up? Can you really partition that? Sometimes you can't. Maybe there needs to be this belief that, yes, if I get paid less, it doesn't mean death. I'll lose money, but it won't be death. Maybe I can downsize my expenses. Maybe I can cut off this vacation that I needed, that I felt like I had to have with the people that I were going to go with. Maybe I need to start to kind of mitigate some of my expenses so that I can have a peaceful environment. right? That is one of the most important things. You have to be willing to ask yourself those questions because your health is so important. And toxic environments, how many hours you're spending? Minimum 40 hours in this energy, right? Now, obviously it's a little different now, and probably this may be a respite for some during COVID where people are working from home. But just think how nervous people are when it opens back up again, and having to deal with the politics, the office politics, the conversations, the little jabs here and there. That can make a person sick. So maybe it's time to question. Maybe it's time to see what other options are available.
Well said. I mean, on so many levels, my mind just sort of processing what you were saying, and I think that to stand up to bullies, you got to be in a position of strength, right?
Yeah.
A position of resolve, that you've gotten to a point where enough is enough on this thing, because, like you were saying, the emotional and physical toll it takes is hyper real,
Right.
is extensively real, and you're right. If you're in this sort of the soup or this fog for 40 hours a week, and you got people that are really trying to undermine you at every level in the organization. And I think what people have to understand, and they probably do subconsciously or some level, is at the end of the day, corporations are there for corporations. They're there for profits. You're a cog in the wheel. No matter what they tell you, no matter what
Right.
they say, ultimately it comes down to dollars and cents.
Right.
And if you're in your 50s or 60s, they can hire somebody in their 20s and 30s at a fraction of the cost. They'll do it.
Yeah.
So the idea of loyalty at some levels is really kind of a one-way street. So that's the bargain people sign up for.
Right.
But having said all that, no matter where you're at in life, if you're tolerating bullying, I mean, it is life destroying, and certainly the ripple effect to your family, your friends, and I'd argue even to your career. Because if you're in that environment, how motivated are you to excel, to be creative, to be next level and level up? You're just not. It just sucks the energy out.
Yeah. And it's a tough, I'm of two minds of this, but it's obviously ultimately one. Our perspective is what determines whether something is good or bad, right? Suffering is relevant to where we see ourselves in the story. And one of the problems that is most difficult to our happiness is should, could, or wish. In a bad environment, you can create good things. Eckhart Tolle said the perfect definition of peace is being at peace without your version of peace. Now, it's kind of a mind flip, but we have an image of what would make us peaceful. And we're like, if we have that, then we'll have peace. But true peace is being at peace without having that version of peace. And really, in these type of spaces, when you're in a work environment that you can't leave right now, you have two options. Option A is to hate it and to pull out all its flaws and build that story. Option B is to separate from that hate, stop pulling out those flaws, and write a new story. If you write a news story where you see this boss or this coworker, to almost imagine them as like a disgruntled client. If it was a client who's going to give you a lot of money, you would find a way to make it work, right? And if you could also start to cover what you're grateful for, if you could also start to cover the opportunities that there are for you to learn, maybe it's even learn how to deal with different dynamics and personalities, to learn how to build up a person who may seem like an enemy in the moment so that you can make them feel comfortable so that you can create enough space for you to build up your own. If you can see it as this is an opportunity for me to share my own personal brand and see it as despite what's going on around me, I want my brand to be a lighthouse in this organization, in this company. You choose the story. And once you choose the story will decide for your behaviors. And once that happens, you then move down that path. And it's either a path down towards destruction or it's a path up, right? Towards this new evolution of yourself where circumstances don't determine anything. We've talked about this whole time, resilience. If you can be resilient in these times, if you can find joy in these times, which is possible in any position, there's possibility to find some level of joy. Even if the joy is I'm learning something about myself and others. If you can do that, it'll shift your energy, increase your productivity, allow you to be a person that is not swept by the wind or the waves, and it'll allow you to find more opportunities and more people like that and more jobs like that that'll allow you to really excel to be the highest version of yourself. It's all a shift of story.
Yeah, no, that's good. And, because, if one doesn't deal with the problem, I would argue soon people will fight. We see that what's not solved at a local level ultimately is dealt with at a societal level. We look at Antifa, we look at what's going on in the view of corporate America
Right.
And the opportunity to excel and grow and have those same opportunities for everybody. We see dynamic between college educated people and technical workers. And, and it's sort of shifting. But again, if we don't stand up, and I think that's the opportunity, that if you're in that environment, you have a duty to stand up to tyranny. You have a duty to say what you have to say. Because, even if they were to let you go, is that the worst thing? I mean, if you've got cancer growing from this organization inside your soul, I would argue that it's probably the best thing you could do for yourself. The
Absolutely.
very best thing you could do. And standing up to it and dealing with tyranny when it's small prevents it from getting big, because the system will respond when it gets big enough.
It's such a good point, man. At the end of the day, you want to leave with a good taste in your mouth about you, right? And sometimes just standing up, see something, say something, just by just showing up, I can't describe how much of an effect it has on everybody who witnesses it, right? Everybody who witnesses it. And I've had that. I've seen it where, there's a place that I was doing some work at, and one of the employees sent out this message to everybody. And she was certain she was going to get fired. But what's so funny is she wasn't fired. A lot of people agreed with her, and there was a forced change. Right? That's just kind of what happened. Now, here's the funny thing is, years later, she's not even working there anymore, but people still talk about that. If people are still talking about it that aren't even working there, that means that it's affected them on a personal level, on a character level. They now see what's possible because somebody who was sitting right next to them as a peer all of a sudden voiced it. Now, it's not to just try to destroy, but what it is to speak that truth as best as you can. And just like you said, if it's toxic and you get let go, you leave with your dignity, which is one of the most powerful things in the world. There's no job that is worth your dignity. If I put the best paying job and your dignity here, every time, dignity, it's just so powerful. And it gives you those better paying jobs with better cultures. That's the ultimate thing. You want the right butt in the right seat. And if I want to live a life of happiness and I know I'm spending 40 hours a week at a place, I better damn well make sure that I enjoy being there. Because I'm not going to make that much of my life misery, and then another part of it sleep, and then this little sliver enjoyment. No way.
Well, a lot of people make that trade-off, right? And you think about it,
Right.
Most people aren't dying multi-bazillionaires. Most people die with a little bit of money that the government's going to still try to come after, and they try to give it to their loved ones. So it's really about prioritizing happiness, joy, and I think what people really glum on to is certainty. I mean, the stress comes in the environment, the work environment, where certainty's been wrought. Either my career, my reputation, my ideas aren't being received as I'd like them to be received. But that idea of certainty, that when I go in there and I make an adjustment, right? Certainly, it goes that way. In fact, yesterday I went flying up over near Catalina in LA, and it was a kind of an acrobatic experimental plane. We're doing aileron rolls. And the thing about this plane is it required very small movements. Like normally, it was a joystick. Normally you have the steering wheel, and on a 172, it's not very fast and quick. And so when you move, it'll turn slowly but surely. This thing was just like snap, 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 probably cruised about 180 knots. And the point was, it was a really small course correction. So that's the other thing I'd say, that when you're in these situations, I agree with you, Burke. What you said was a perfect analogy, that when you speak into it, as long as it's done through character and integrity, and
Absolutely.
you're not bitter and angry, and you're not trying to air dirty laundry, because no one's going to listen to you at that point. You just get tuned out.
It's too personal.
It's too personal. But if you come into it with a rational, cogent argument, fact-based, elevated thinking, it's important to speak up. And that one little course correction of what you said to the organization could be the difference of life and death of that organization in terms of the people. Because I would argue that when it goes bad, it goes from bad to worse from a toxicity standpoint, you're going to lose a ton of people to competitors, to other people. And I've seen this happen again and again. And this is where you have leadership that loses sight. Ego gets in the way of better judgment, and they know better because they're, after all, in the C-suite, which I would argue doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Because you can promote useful idiots as well anywhere. Right. So, man, the opportunity is, if you're an executive, a CEO, is just like your customer that you're selling your product to.
Right.
You've got to look at the people that work for you equally or more important than the customers you're selling to.
Oh, man. And I think this is probably the most important thing. If you are a leader or a hiring manager, you have to pull for character, not pull for familiarity. And this is what I've seen a lot of times, is people are pulling up their friends into this leadership role, management or C-suite, the people they know. And what happens is you create this echo chamber of a certain type of personality and work. And so what happens is if you're my friend, I'm not having any issues with you. But if I don't understand how this dynamic is different, if I were to work under my friend, right? If I work side to side of my friend, they may be a great person, but give them power, maybe I'll see all of a sudden who they really are. So what happens is by pulling by familiarity, you're killing your company. What you pull by is character and culture. Do they exhibit the characteristics of what I want in this culture? Plus, am I able to connect with them in a way that is strong, even though I don't know them as well, right? All of a sudden, what that does is it creates this matriculation of healthiness throughout the entire space. Instead of creating the good old boys club of people who are just like, I'm just with my people that I know, all of a sudden you're saying, no, I want a diversity of thought, but I want singularity of character, singularity of culture. When that happens, man, it makes the craziest difference on the company, and it saves you. You can't quantify how much money and how much resources, even human resources, you maintain, absorb, keep, magnify, right? And also magnetize to that organization. And so it's incumbent upon leaders, upon hiring managers to be able to think from a space of character and culture. Will they add to this space? And will they, as they come in, be matriculated to know that this is what we expect and this is what we don't expect? If you do these things, it grows. If you do these things, you kind of lose your space with us. When that becomes super clear, you erase so many issues, and the issues that do pop up can be resolved through the context of the culture and behaviors that have been already prepared and set.
Yeah, well said. Well, I think we can go on and on about this, but I think psychopaths, bullies are very real in the workplace.
Right.
I think if you're going to, coming across it, you really have to have a backup plan, really incumbent. And then I think you have to really honestly assess, are you the problem, or is it really the environment the problem? Are you just bitter? Are you just angry? Check that out with your friends, coworkers, people that really love you and know you the best. And then if it is real in the organization, I think this is a call to action. You got to speak up, because the only thing you lose is really what you gain from leaving that situation and becoming whole again. Because I would tell, my experience, I've seen this happen to people. It has destroyed their lives and their careers, right? That's an identity crisis. If my identity is built on my career progression, what I've accomplished, right? And that gets rocked, my God, that's called the ultimate identity crisis.
It's real.
So, Hurricane,
hey, Ben.
Another great masterclass. Thanks. Great insights, and looking forward to next week's topic.
Sounds good, buddy. Great talking.
All right.